Picture this. You're standing on a dusty road in the Holy Land, the sun beating down as a column of warriors moves past you. Not just any fighters, but men clad in white tunics marked by bold red crosses. They move with a unity and purpose that feels almost supernatural, their eyes fixed ahead, their presence both serene and intimidating. These were the Knights Templar, and to their contemporaries, they seemed less like ordinary soldiers and more like a force of nature-devout monks who could transform into unstoppable combatants in the blink of an eye. Their reputation wasn't built on myth or rumor. It was forged in the fires of discipline, preparation, and an almost otherworldly commitment to their cause. For centuries, their name has echoed through history as the ultimate symbol of medieval knightly virtue and military excellence. But what was the secret behind their near-mythical status? How did a group of knights, bound by vows of poverty and obedience, become one of the most effective and feared fighting forces of the Middle Ages? The answer lies not in magic or mystery, but in something far more tangible and profound: their training. The Templar training regimen was a masterpiece of medieval discipline, blending physical rigor, spiritual depth, and tactical innovation into a seamless whole. It was this daily dedication, this relentless pursuit of perfection in mind, body, and spirit, that set them apart on battlefields from Jerusalem to France. Their methods were so advanced, so thorough, that they didn't just win battles, they shaped the very way warfare was understood and practiced in their time. In this video, we're going to step into their world. We'll explore every aspect of the Templar training regimen, from their pre-dawn prayers to their weapons drills, from their mastery of horsemanship to the psychological resilience that allowed them to face overwhelming odds without flinching. We'll see how their unique fusion of monastic devotion and martial skill created a new template for military discipline, one that would influence armies for centuries to come. And perhaps most importantly, we'll discover what their approach can teach us about overcoming challenges, building resilience, and striving for excellence in our own lives. This is more than a history lesson. It's a journey into the heart of one of history's most compelling stories of discipline, dedication, and legacy. So join us as we uncover the secrets of the Knights Templar and explore what their training reveals about the nature of true strength. To truly grasp the intensity of the Templar training regimen, we must first step back into the world that created them, a world of fervent faith, violent conflict, and desperate need. The year was 1119 in the aftermath of the First Crusade. While Christian forces had captured Jerusalem, the routes to the Holy City remained perilous, plagued by bandits and marauding soldiers. Pilgrims who had traveled thousands of miles by foot were routinely robbed, kidnapped, or killed along the dusty roads of Outremer, the Crusader states. Into this chaos stepped two knights, a French noble named Hugues de Payens and his relative Godfrey de Saint-Omer. Their solution was as radical as it was simple. They proposed a new kind of order, one that would take the monastic vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, but would wield the sword not for earthly lords, but for the protection of the vulnerable. They would be monks of war. This vision resonated powerfully with the religious and political powers of the time. In 1129, at the Council of Troyes, the order received official papal endorsement from Pope Honorius II, largely thanks to the fervent support of the influential abbot Bernard of Clairvaux. Bernard's writing in praise of the new knighthood provided the ideological blueprint, glorifying these warrior monks as soldiers of Christ who could achieve salvation through shedding blood for a holy cause. rather than by retreating from the world. This church sanction was their turning point. It transformed them from a well-intentioned militia into an international institution, granting them a unique status that placed them above local kings and laws, answering only to the Pope himself. This privileged position fueled their meteoric rise. Donations of land, money, and sons from noble families across Europe poured in, creating a vast network of preceptories and commanderies that functioned as both monastic houses and military training bases. Their banking system, which allowed pilgrims to deposit funds in Europe and withdraw them in the Holy Land, made them incredibly wealthy and influential financiers. But with this power came a monumental responsibility and an even greater target on their backs. They were the standing army of the Crusader states, the elite force expected to hold the line against overwhelming odds. Their very existence depended on being not just good, but exceptional, a level of excellence that could only be achieved through the most rigorous, unforgiving, and comprehensive training imaginable. Their origins in crisis and their elevated status meant that failure was not an option. Their discipline had to be absolute and their readiness constant. This is the crucible in which their legendary training was forged. This fusion of monk and warrior was not just a lofty ideal. It was etched into the very fabric of their daily existence through a document known simply as the Rule. Originally composed in Latin with the guidance of Bernard of Clairvaux, this extensive set of regulations dictated every conceivable aspect of a Templar's life. It prescribed the number of prayers to be recited, the type of clothing to be worn, the amount of food to be eaten, and even the specific manner in which a knight should tend to his horse. The rule forbade frivolous conversation, excessive ornamentation on equipment, and any form of familiar contact with women, including one's own mother or sister. This was not merely a code of conduct, it was a comprehensive blueprint for spiritual and military excellence, designed to forge a new kind of human instrument, one wholly dedicated to a divine cause. The daily rhythm of a Templar knight was a powerful physical manifestation of this dual identity. His life pulsed to the steady beat of the canonical hours, the set times for prayer observed by monastic communities across Christendom. The day would begin in the deep darkness before dawn with matins, a service that involved chanting psalms and hearing scripture. This was followed by lauds at daybreak and then prime, the first hour of the day. Only after these devotions would the knight break his fast. The spiritual and the martial were then interwoven throughout the day. A training session with the sword might be immediately followed by the midday prayer of sext. The afternoon prayer of none could precede a lesson in cavalry maneuvers. This constant cycling between prayer and practice served a profound psychological purpose. It continually reminded the knight that his strength was not his own, that his skill with the sword was a gift from God to be used in his service alone. It was a system designed to prevent the pride and arrogance that often corrupted secular knights, grounding their lethal prowess in a framework of humility and obedience. This spiritual foundation provided the Templars with a psychological armor that was every bit as important as their mail hauberks. Before a battle, knights were expected to partake in confession, cleansing their souls and seeking absolution for their sins. This ritual was not seen as a mere formality, but as a critical preparation for the possibility of meeting their Maker on the field. It allowed them to enter combat with a clear conscience and a tranquil mind, free from the paralyzing weight of guilt or fear. The communal prayers and masses fostered an incredible sense of brotherhood and shared purpose. A Templar did not fight for personal glory or land. He fought for his brothers standing beside him and for the God they all served. This created a unit cohesion that was virtually unbreakable. In the chaos of battle, where lesser armies might fracture and flee, the Templars held their formation, bound together by something far stronger than feudal obligation, a sacred vow. This monastic military fusion also extended to their very appearance and demeanor. The famous white mantle, emblazoned with the red cross, was a symbol of their purity and their willingness to become martyrs for their faith. The rules stipulated that this mantle must be kept clean and was never to be worn by anyone outside the order. Their beards, another requirement, set them apart from the clean-shaven secular knights and identified them as men living under a religious rule. Even their silence was a weapon. The rule encouraged quiet contemplation and forbade idle gossip, which helped to maintain focus and discipline within the communal living spaces. In an era known for its boisterous and often unruly warriors, the Templars were noted for their sober, disciplined, and almost serene presence, a calmness that must have been deeply unsettling to their enemies on the eve of battle. Ultimately, this unique synthesis of the cloister and the camp created a form of discipline that was both internal and external. It was not just about obeying orders from a commander. It was about aligning one's entire will with a higher purpose. The constant prayers internalized the order's values, making discipline a matter of personal conviction rather than mere compliance. The physical rigors of training, when combined with ascetic practices like fasting and silence, forged a will of iron. This is what allowed a Templar knight to remain steadfast in the face of terror, to charge into a wall of spears without hesitation, and to hold the line when all hope seemed lost. Their strength came from the belief that they were instruments of divine will, and that conviction, hammered into them day after day through their unique way of life, made them one of the most psychologically resilient fighting forces the world has ever seen. The life of a Templar knight was a symphony of disciplined repetition, each day unfolding with a precision that would impress even the most modern military drill instructor. This was not a life of chaotic adventure, but one of profound order, where every hour had its purpose and every action its place. The entire system was designed to eliminate idleness, which was seen as a gateway to sin and weakness, and to instead forge a man who was perpetually ready spiritually, mentally, and physically for the ultimate test of combat. Their daily schedule, dictated by the rule, was the engine of this transformation, a relentless cycle that turned devout men into unstoppable instruments of war. Long before the sun would even think of cresting the horizon, the Templar's day commenced in the deep silence of the night. The call to matins would pull him from his simple bed, and he would make his way to the chapel for the first prayer service of the day. This was not a casual affair. The rule demanded full attendance, and the knights would stand through the recitation of psalms and scripture, their voices joining in chant. This pre-dawn devotion was crucial. It set the tone for the entire day, grounding their coming labors in a spiritual context. They were not training for personal glory, but for God's work. Following matins, they might catch a few more hours of rest until the first light of dawn signaled the office of prime, which was then followed by the celebration of Mass. Only after fulfilling these primary spiritual duties would they break their fast with a simple, modest meal, typically bread and water or perhaps some wine, understanding that the soul must be fed before the body. With the spiritual foundation firmly laid, the morning hours were then dedicated to the sharpening of the body and combat skills. This was where the raw material of a knight was honed into a lethal weapon. The training grounds would erupt with the sounds of clashing steel, shouted commands, and the thunder of hooves. Weapons training was exhaustive and repetitive. A knight would practice hundreds of cuts, thrusts, and parries with his longsword, not to learn new tricks, but to engrave these movements so deeply into his muscle memory that they would become instinctual in the fog of war. He would train with the lance, charging at quintaines, rotating dummy targets, learning to strike with immense force while avoiding a counterswing that could unhorse him. Sparring sessions conducted with blunted weapons tested his skills against his brothers, fostering a competitive yet brotherly environment where everyone pushed each other to improve. The afternoons often shifted focus from intense martial practice to the essential, yet less glamorous, duties that sustained the order's operational readiness. This was the time for labor, the manual work that ensured their infrastructure remained strong. A knight might be tasked with maintaining his gear, meticulously cleaning and oiling his mail to prevent rust, sharpening his blades to a razor's edge, or repairing straps and buckles on his saddle. Others might be assigned to work in the stables, grooming the powerful destrier warhorses, checking their shoes, and ensuring their fitness, for the bond between a knight and his mount was sacred. Some could be detailed to assist in the order's workshops or even tend to the gardens that supplied their food. This emphasis on manual labor served multiple purposes. It maintained their self-sufficiency. It instilled humility by having high-born knights perform mundane tasks, and it provided a different kind of physical conditioning, building functional strength and endurance. As daylight began to wane, the rhythm of the day once again turned inward. The evening prayer of Vespers marked a transition from the physical labors of the day back to contemplation. After a communal supper eaten in silence while listening to a religious reading, the knights would participate in the final canonical hour of Compline. This service was a time for examination of conscience, a moment to reflect on the day's actions, seek forgiveness for any failures, and prepare the soul for sleep and the ever-present possibility of death. The rule then commanded silence throughout the night, a time for rest and private prayer. This structured existence, cycling predictably between prayer, training, and labor, created a powerful psychological anchor. It eliminated uncertainty and fostered a profound sense of stability and purpose. In a world filled with chaos, the Templar's routine was his sanctuary, the unwavering discipline that prepared him to face any chaos on the battlefield. The sheer physical demands placed on a Templar knight were almost unimaginable by today's standards, and their conditioning was engineered to meet those brutal challenges head-on. We must remember that a full suit of plate armor, which they would have worn in later periods, could weigh between 45 and 55 pounds. Add to that the weight of a shield, a heavy sword or lance, and the mail worn underneath, and a knight was carrying a staggering amount of metal into battle. This was not a static costume. It was a mobile prison of steel that required immense strength and endurance just to move in, let alone fight effectively for hours under the blistering sun of the Holy Land. Their training, therefore, was not about building a bodybuilder's physique for show, but about forging a functional, resilient instrument capable of operating at peak efficiency under the most grueling conditions imaginable. Their strength training was remarkably modern in its principles, relying on functional movements with improvised weights. There were no finely calibrated dumbbells or weight machines in a 12th century preceptory. Instead, knights would lift and carry heavy stones, hoist logs onto their shoulders, and practice pulling themselves up onto wooden beams or over walls. These exercises developed the raw, practical strength needed to grapple with an opponent, pull oneself onto a horse while wearing full gear, or wield a heavy weapon repeatedly without the arms tiring. They engaged in wrestling and grappling drills, not as a formal martial art, but as a vital survival skill for the close quarters chaos of a melee, where a knight might find himself unhorsed and fighting for his life in the mud against multiple adversaries. This foundational strength was the bedrock upon which all other skills were built. Endurance, however, was arguably even more critical than raw power. A Crusader campaign was defined by its grueling marches across vast, often hostile, landscapes. A Templar knight might need to cover 20 or 30 miles a day in his armor, carrying his provisions under the relentless Middle Eastern sun. To prepare for this, their training included forced marches while wearing weighted packs or even their mail shirts, building the cardiovascular stamina and mental fortitude to keep moving long after exhaustion had set in. They ran long distances to improve their wind and leg strength, not for speed, but for the relentless, grinding endurance that could break an enemy army before a single blow was even struck. This cultivated an incredible resilience, a deep well of energy that allowed them to arrive at a battlefield not as a spent force, but as a fresh and disciplined unit ready to engage. The pinnacle of their physical conditioning was the mastery of mounted combat in full gear. The warhorse or destrier was itself a massive animal, and controlling it required not just skill but tremendous core strength and balance. A knight had to learn to mount and dismount quickly while armed, a difficult feat that was practiced until it became second nature. Once in the saddle, the real work began. He had to guide the horse with pressure from his knees and feet, all while managing a shield and a 12-foot lance, and later, a sword or mace. The impact of a lance strike at full gallop sent a shockwave through the entire body, requiring immense stability to absorb without being thrown from the saddle. They practiced these charges over and over, building the specific muscle groups and neural pathways needed to function as a single, unified weapon with their horse. This synergy of man and mount, achieved through exhausting repetition, is what made the Templar Charge one of the most feared tactical maneuvers on the medieval battlefield. Their bodies were not just strong, they were specifically, meticulously conditioned to be extensions of their weapons and their steeds, a testament to a holistic understanding of fitness that was centuries ahead of its time. A Templar's relationship with his weapons was not one of mere ownership, but of profound, intimate mastery. Each tool in his arsenal was chosen for a distinct purpose, and his training ensured he could wield it with lethal efficiency. The longsword was his primary instrument, a versatile weapon for both cutting and thrusting. Training with it was relentless, focusing on repetitive drills to perfect fundamental strokes like the powerful downward cut or the precise thrust aimed at the gaps in an opponent's armor. But this was far from mindless repetition. Knights practiced these moves against pels, wooden posts that simulated an adversary, honing their accuracy and the angle of impact. They then engaged in controlled sparring with blunted weapons known as fechten, where they could test their techniques against a living, reacting partner. This built not just muscle memory but tactical intelligence, teaching them to read an opponent's movements and react instinctively without a moment's hesitation. While the sword was the symbol of knighthood, the lance was the hammer of the Templar Charge. This was not a simple spear. It was a sophisticated piece of military technology, often 12 feet long and made of strong, tapered wood with a steel tip. Mastering it was a complex art form conducted atop a galloping warhorse. Knights trained to couch the lance under the arm, locking it firmly against the body to form a single, rigid unit with the horse's momentum. The goal was to deliver the entire force of the charge into a single, devastating point of impact, capable of unhorsing a knight or piercing through a shield. They practiced against quintains rotating dummies that would swing around and strike an inattentive rider, teaching them to strike and immediately prepare for a counterblow or to seamlessly draw another weapon. This demanding skill required perfect balance, immense core strength, and an almost telepathic connection with their destrier. For close quarters brutality, the mace and flail were indispensable. Against an opponent encased in plate armor, a sword's edge could be ineffective, often just glancing off the hardened steel. The mace, however, with its heavy, often flanged head, was designed not to cut but to crush. It transmitted concussive force through the armor, breaking bones and causing traumatic internal injuries without needing to pierce the metal. Training with these weapons focused on short, powerful swings aimed at key target areas like the helmet, shoulders, or joints. The flail, a spiked ball attached to a handle by a chain, added a whipping motion that could generate even greater force and was particularly effective for striking over or around an opponent's shield. This pragmatic choice of weaponry reveals the Templars' utterly practical approach to combat. They were not romantic duelists, but efficient soldiers who used the best tool for the job, regardless of how brutal it might seem. Beyond the glamour of knightly arms, the Templars also embraced the crossbow, a weapon that was sometimes controversially labeled as unchivalrous but was undeniably effective. Its ability to punch through armor at a distance made it a crucial part of their tactical portfolio. Sergeants, who were non-noble members of the order, often specialized as crossbowmen. Training involved mastering the slow, methodical process of spanning the heavy weapon with a windlass or crank, then achieving pinpoint accuracy against moving targets. This skill was vital for defending castle walls, providing covering fire during a retreat, or thinning enemy ranks before a cavalry charge. The Templars' willingness to integrate this powerful missile weapon into their strategy highlights their adaptive and modern mindset, prioritizing battlefield results over outdated notions of honor. Yet, mastery was not only in the wielding but also in the upkeep. A knight's life depended on the reliability of his equipment, and a significant part of his training was dedicated to maintenance. After every training session, and certainly after any engagement, a Templar would meticulously clean his sword and other steel arms to prevent the relentless threat of rust, using oil and sand to scour away moisture and blood. He would inspect the haft of his mace for cracks, check the tension of the crossbow's string, and ensure the lance was straight and splinter-free. This daily ritual of care was a meditative practice that reinforced the knight's bond with his tools and ingrained a profound sense of personal responsibility. A dull blade, a loose rivet, or a frayed strap could fail at the critical moment, turning a skilled warrior into a vulnerable victim. This comprehensive education, from the grand spectacle of the cavalry charge to the quiet, methodical care of his gear, forged a fighter of unparalleled versatility, ready to meet the chaotic and unforgiving demands of medieval warfare with disciplined competence. For a Templar knight, his warhorse was far more than a simple means of transportation. It was his most vital partner in battle, a 1,000-pound extension of his own will and weaponry. The bond between man and steed was sacred, cultivated through years of relentless, specialized training designed to achieve a single, devastating objective: to function as a unified, living weapon on the battlefield. The destrier, the massive warhorse bred for strength and courage, was the centerpiece of this strategy. These animals were the tanks of the medieval world, and a knight's ability to command them with precision was what made the Templar Charge a thing of legendary terror. Their training focused on achieving a seamless synergy, where the knight could guide the horse with subtle pressures from his knees and legs, leaving his hands free to manage shield, lance, and sword. This wasn't about tame riding, it was about controlling a powerful, often volatile, animal in the midst of absolute chaos, a skill that separated the elite from the merely competent. The drills they practiced were exhaustingly repetitive, designed to forge instinct where only conscious thought existed before. They would charge at full gallop across open fields, aiming their lances at suspended rings or wooden quintains, learning to strike a target with immense force while maintaining perfect balance. They practiced wheeling their horses in tight, coordinated turns as a unit, a maneuver critical for regrouping after a charge to avoid being isolated and overwhelmed. One of the most vital skills was the ability to bring a charging line to a sudden, disciplined halt on command. An uncontrolled charge that continued too far could plunge a knight deep into enemy lines, breaking the formation and leaving him vulnerable to being surrounded and pulled from his saddle. This precise control, the ability to advance, strike, and withdraw in good order, was the hallmark of their professional discipline and the key to their tactical flexibility. This mastery of mounted combat reached its apex in the execution of the disciplined charge, the Templars' signature battlefield maneuver. Unlike the chaotic, individualistic rushes depicted in some films, a Templar charge was a controlled explosion of force. Knights would form up in a tight wedge or line, their horses almost touching, creating a wall of muscle and steel. They would begin at a walk, then a trot, conserving the horse's energy for the final, decisive moment. Only when the command was given would they break into a full gallop, lowering their lances in unison just seconds before impact. The psychological effect of this sight, a silent, advancing line of white-clad knights that suddenly erupts into a thundering, unstoppable avalanche, was often enough to break an enemy's nerve before a single blow was landed. The physical impact was even more devastating, capable of shattering infantry formations and punching a hole through which other Crusader forces could advance. But this fearsome capability was built on a foundation of meticulous care and profound respect for the horses themselves. The rule of the order contained detailed instructions on the treatment and maintenance of their mounts. A knight was responsible for the daily grooming, feeding, and watering of his horse. He had to inspect its hooves for stones, check its shoes for wear, and ensure its coat and gear were clean to prevent sores and infection. The knights understood that a malnourished, exhausted, or injured horse was a liability that could get them killed. This daily routine of care was not seen as a menial chore, but as an essential act of preparation and a reflection of the order's values. It fostered a deep, interdependent relationship. The knight's life depended on the horse's strength and health, and the horse's well-being depended entirely on the knight's diligence. This holistic approach, blending supreme martial skill with humble, responsible stewardship, reveals the depth of the Templars' understanding of warfare. They knew that true power on the medieval battlefield was not born from brute force alone, but from the disciplined fusion of man, animal, and tactics into an irresistible force. While a single Templar knight was a formidable warrior, their true power was only unleashed when they moved and fought as one. The chaos of a medieval battlefield, a deafening cacophony of clashing steel, screaming men, and panicked horses was the ultimate test of discipline, and it was here that their relentless formation drills paid off in blood and victory. They understood that a disorganized mob of skilled individuals could be easily outmaneuvered and destroyed, but a tightly knit unit, acting with a single will, could become an unstoppable force. Their training grounds were not just for individual skill, but for building a collective consciousness, a shared rhythm that allowed dozens of men to operate as a single entity. This was the essence of their tactical superiority, transforming them from a group of knights into a living, breathing weapon. One of their most feared and effective formations was the wedge, a triangular charge designed to punch through enemy lines with surgical precision. Imagine the sight, a solid wall of white-mantled knights, their lances lowered in perfect unison, thundering toward you at an accelerating pace. The knight at the very tip of this arrowhead was the point of maximum impact, a position of immense honor and even greater danger. Those behind and to the sides followed his lead, their horses almost touching, creating a concentrated mass of force aimed at a single, vulnerable point in the enemy formation. The goal was not to engage in a prolonged melee but to smash through the line, shattering morale and creating instant disarray. Once the breach was made, following infantry or additional cavalry could pour through the gap to exploit the confusion, rolling up the enemy flank from within. This maneuver required absolute trust. Every knight had to have faith that the man beside him would hold his position and that the entire unit would drive forward without hesitation. Conversely, when caught at a disadvantage or needing to protect a valuable asset or wounded brother, the Templars would seamlessly shift into a defensive circle or square. In this formation, knights would face outward with their lances or swords presented, creating a bristling, impenetrable hedgehog of steel. The horses, trained to stand firm amidst the noise and terror, would be kept in the center. This was a testament to their incredible discipline under pressure. In the heat of battle, the natural instinct is to flee or to break formation and fight individually. The Templars, through exhaustive repetition, suppressed that instinct. They stood shoulder to shoulder, their shields interlocking, each man responsible for defending his brother's flank. This formation could hold against vastly superior numbers, turning them into an unbreakable rock in the midst of a swirling, violent sea. It was the ultimate expression of their brotherhood, a promise that no knight would be left behind. The glue that held these complex maneuvers together was not shouted commands, which would be lost in the din of combat, but a sophisticated system of non-verbal communication and ingrained trust. They used banners, flags, and trumpet calls to signal changes in formation, direction, or tempo. Every knight had to know these signals by heart and react to them instantly without question or delay. This created a fluidity on the battlefield that their opponents often found bewildering. A wedge could disperse and reform as a defensive square in a matter of moments, then just as quickly switch back to an offensive charge. This level of coordination was only possible because they spent countless hours drilling these very transitions on the practice field, until the movements became as natural as breathing. They learned to read the subtle shifts in the group's momentum, to anticipate the actions of their brethren, and to maintain their spacing without even looking. This unwavering focus on unit cohesion fundamentally challenges the romanticized Hollywood image of medieval combat as a series of dramatic duels between heroes. For the Templars, there was no glory in a solo charge that broke the line and left the formation vulnerable. Individual heroics were discouraged unless they directly served the unit's objective. Their strength was their unity, a discipline that valued the survival and success of the whole over the pride of any single part. This collective mentality, hammered into them through endless formation drills, is what allowed them to execute complex tactical retreats, one of the most difficult maneuvers in warfare, without collapsing into a disorganized rout. They could withdraw in good order, steadily and defiantly, presenting a deadly front to any pursuer. This mastery of formation fighting reveals a sophisticated understanding of psychology and physics on the battlefield, proving that the medieval period was not an era of mindless brutality, but one of calculated, disciplined, and brilliantly executed teamwork. Yet for all their physical might and martial skill, the Templars understood a profound truth that many modern warriors have rediscovered. The most powerful weapon on any battlefield is the human mind. Their legendary courage wasn't a product of brute strength alone, but of a meticulously cultivated mental and spiritual fortress, built brick by brick through daily disciplines that modern science would later recognize as essential for peak performance under pressure. Imagine facing a line of Saracen cavalry thundering toward you, the desert sun glinting off their scimitars, the ground shaking beneath their charge. In that moment of sheer terror, where the instinct of any ordinary soldier would be to freeze or flee, a Templar knight stood firm. His calmness wasn't absence of fear, but mastery over it, a mastery forged not on the training grounds, but in the silent, dimly lit chapels during the pre-dawn hours of prayer. This mental resilience was systematically engineered through the Order's strict rule, which functioned as a comprehensive manual for psychological conditioning. The mandatory periods of silence, for instance, were far more than a monastic affectation. They were a form of sustained mental training. By forbidding idle chatter and encouraging quiet reflection, the rule forced knights to sit with their own thoughts, to confront their anxieties and doubts in the stillness. This practice built an incredible capacity for focused concentration, allowing a knight to block out the chaotic noise and visceral horror of battle and zero in on his commander's signals or the immediate threat before him. The constant cycle of prayer, the canonical hours that segmented their day, acted as a series of psychological resets. Before a training session, prayer dedicated the coming exertion to God. After a meal, gratitude reinforced humility. This continual recentering prevented the buildup of stress and aggression, channeling raw combat energy into a controlled, purposeful focus. It was a system designed to create a warrior who was not numb to danger, but profoundly centered within it. Perhaps the most potent tool in their psychological arsenal was the practice of regular confession. In an era where the threat of dying in a state of sin meant eternal damnation, the spiritual burden on a soldier could be paralyzing. The Templars neutralized this fear through a pragmatic and routine approach to absolution. Knights were encouraged to confess their sins frequently, not as a dramatic, singular event, but as a standard maintenance of their spiritual and mental hygiene. Before a battle, this ritual was especially critical. It offered a form of cognitive closure, allowing a knight to enter the fray with a mind unclouded by guilt, regret, or the existential terror of judgment. He could fight with a startling freedom, believing his soul was already prepared for whatever outcome awaited him. This wasn't blind fanaticism. It was a sophisticated method of managing the ultimate psychological stressor, the prospect of imminent death, and transforming it from a source of panic into a foundation for incredible courage. Furthermore, the vows of poverty and obedience directly attacked two of the greatest vulnerabilities in a warrior's psyche: ego and avarice. A secular knight might be tempted to break formation to capture a valuable ransom or to pursue personal glory, actions that could jeopardize an entire battle plan. The Templar, owning nothing personally and sworn to absolute obedience, was immunized against these distractions. His humility ensured he remained a single, disciplined note in the larger symphony of the unit's action. There was no internal conflict between personal gain and collective duty because the former had been systematically eliminated from his psychological makeup. This created a unique and formidable mindset, a soldier utterly free from the selfish impulses that often lead to reckless mistakes, capable of executing orders with machine-like precision because his personal identity was wholly subsumed within the mission and the Brotherhood. This blend of spiritual practice and mental conditioning didn't just create good monks or good soldiers, it forged a new kind of human instrument, one whose true strength was an unshakable inner calm that could withstand the whirlwind of medieval warfare. This chivalric code was far more than a vague set of noble aspirations. For the Templar, it was a practical, enforceable legal and spiritual framework that dictated his every decision. While the popular concept of chivalry often conjures images of courtly love and jousting tournaments, the Templar interpretation was stripped of all romantic frivolity. Theirs was a utilitarian virtue, a soldier's code designed for the harsh realities of holy war. It was deeply embedded in their rule, which explicitly commanded them to be the first to advance and the last to retreat in battle, to never surrender while their banner still flew, and to prioritize the defense of pilgrims and the weak above their own safety. This transformed abstract ideals like courage and loyalty into concrete, measurable actions on the battlefield. A knight didn't just feel brave, he demonstrated it by holding his position in the line. He didn't just believe in loyalty, he proved it by refusing to abandon his brothers, even in the face of certain death. This codification of morality provided an unambiguous guide for conduct, eliminating the moral ambiguity that could paralyze a less disciplined fighter. The daily enforcement of this code within the closed community of the Order was what gave it its power. Infractions against the chivalric ideals were not simply frowned upon, they were met with severe, humiliating punishments. A knight who showed cowardice, who broke formation for personal glory, or who mistreated a non-combatant could face being stripped of his white mantle, forced to eat his meals on the floor like a dog, or even subjected to corporal punishment or imprisonment. This system of accountability ensured that the code was not just a philosophy for the idealistic, but a baseline standard for every member. It created a powerful culture of peer pressure, where knights policed each other's behavior, striving to uphold the collective honor of the Order. This constant reinforcement meant that when a Templar knight donned his white mantle, he was not merely putting on a uniform, he was assuming a universally understood identity, a promise of certain conduct that was recognized by friend and foe alike across the entire Mediterranean world. This reputation for unwavering integrity became one of their greatest strategic assets. In an age where mercenaries would frequently switch sides for better pay and feudal levies might flee at the first sign of trouble, the Templars' absolute reliability made them the linchpin of any Crusader army. Commanders knew that an order given to the Templars would be carried out without question or hesitation. This trust was invaluable on the chaotic battlefield, allowing for complex tactics that depended on precise timing and unshakable holds. Furthermore, their famous vow of poverty removed the primary motive for plunder that drove other soldiers. While a secular knight might be distracted by looting a rich tent, abandoning the battle line, a Templar was focused solely on the mission. This discipline made them predictable to their allies and terrifyingly unpredictable to their enemies, who could never bait them into breaking formation with the prospect of treasure. Their word was their bond, and their loyalty was not for sale, making them the most dependable and therefore most dangerous force in the region. Perhaps the most profound impact of this chivalric discipline was on the Templars' own sense of identity and morale. By committing to a higher purpose, the protection of the weak and the service of Christ, they transcended the life of a common soldier for hire. They were not fighting for a feudal lord who might be cruel or incompetent, nor for land or gold. They were fighting for a divine cause and for the brother standing next to them. This shared sense of purpose, reinforced daily by their code, forged an incredible unit cohesion. It curbed the selfishness and rivalries that plagued other medieval armies. There was no glory in being the first to charge if it broke the formation. True honor came from upholding the code and ensuring the collective victory. This mindset fostered a profound brotherhood, a bond that meant a Templar would rather die than bring shame upon his brothers or his order. Their chivalry was the glue that held them together, the spiritual armor that protected their morale long after their physical mail had been dented and broken. It was this fusion of elite skill with unassailable ethics that made them not just formidable warriors, but a legendary institution whose mystique continues to captivate us centuries later. While the clashing of steel and the thunder of cavalry charges defined their battlefield presence, the Templars understood that true strength was forged not just on the training grounds, but also at the dining table. In an era where feasting and gluttony were common among the nobility, the Order's approach to nutrition was strikingly modern in its emphasis on moderation, balance and functionality. Their rule provided explicit dietary guidelines, not as a form of punishment, but as a strategic component of their military readiness. A knight's body was his primary weapon, and just like his sword or his horse, it required proper fuel and meticulous maintenance to perform at its peak, especially during the grueling campaigns in the harsh climate of the Holy Land. The typical Templar meal was a testament to pragmatic efficiency. Their diet was built around staples that provided sustained energy and were readily available. Coarse whole grain bread, lentils, beans, and other legumes offered a steady release of carbohydrates for endurance. Cheese and eggs provided essential fats and proteins for muscle repair, while fish, often served on Fridays and other fast days, added lean protein. Meat, particularly pork or mutton, was not a daily indulgence but an occasional luxury, typically reserved for 3 days a week to maintain strength without promoting sluggishness. This was a deliberate rejection of the excess common in noble courts, where rich, heavy foods and copious amounts of wine could impair judgment and physical performance. The Templars' fare was simple, nutritious, and designed for one purpose: to create a soldier who was lean, energized, and always prepared for action. Their consumption of alcohol was similarly regulated. While they were permitted wine, it was heavily diluted with water, a practice that served multiple purposes. It ensured hydration was maintained, a critical concern in the desert heat, while minimizing the intoxicating effects that could cloud a knight's mind or slow his reflexes. The communal act of sharing watered wine also reinforced their bonds of brotherhood without descending into the drunken revelry that could fracture discipline. This measured approach to nourishment reflects a deep, almost scientific understanding of the connection between diet and performance, centuries before such concepts became commonplace. They recognized that a knight suffering from indigestion or a wine-induced headache was a liability, not just to himself but to the entire unit relying on his vigilance. This holistic view of health extended far beyond what they put into their bodies. The rule of the order contained surprisingly advanced directives on hygiene and cleanliness, which were radical for a period often stereotyped as filthy. Knights were instructed to wash their hands before eating and were provided with clean linens and towels. Their living quarters, from the dormitories to the stables, were to be kept scrupulously clean and well ventilated to prevent the spread of disease. In a time when crowded garrisons could easily be decimated by typhus or dysentery, these practices were a matter of life and death. The Templars understood that an army could be defeated not by a superior enemy, but by an invisible one: illness. Their insistence on hygiene was a powerful force multiplier, ensuring that more knights remained combat-ready and that their valuable war horses stayed healthy. This disciplined approach to wellness provided a significant strategic advantage during long sieges or marches, where supply lines were stretched and disease ran rampant. While opposing armies might be weakened by poor nutrition and camp illnesses, the Templars, with their robust constitutions and cleaner living conditions, could maintain their strength and cohesion for longer. Their ability to endure hardship was not merely a testament to their willpower, but a direct result of this systematic care for the body. It was a complete system of military preparedness that acknowledged a simple, profound truth: a knight is a biological system. His endurance, his strength, his sharpness of mind, all of it depended on the fundamental pillars of good food, clean water, and a healthy environment. By mastering these basics with unwavering discipline, the Templars ensured that when they rode into battle, they were not just well-armed and well-trained, but fundamentally well. The Templars' effectiveness was never confined to a single type of battlefield. Their genius lay in a remarkable capacity to adapt, to retool their entire approach to warfare based on the ground beneath their horses' hooves. This was not a skill learned on the fly, but a core component of their training, drilled into them from the very beginning. A knight who had spent his formative years in the lush, green forests of France could not simply arrive in the arid, sun-baked Levant and expect his European tactics to work. The geography itself was an enemy to be understood and conquered. Consequently, their training grounds were designed to simulate these extreme contrasts, forcing knights to solve the unique problems presented by each environment. They learned that the same cavalry charge that could shatter an enemy line on an open plain could become a death trap in a swamp or a dense thicket. This intellectual flexibility, this willingness to abandon dogma for practicality, was a hallmark of their professional discipline and a key reason for their longevity as a military force. In the sprawling deserts of the Holy Land, the Templars faced conditions utterly alien to a European knight. The sheer, oppressive heat was a primary adversary, capable of felling a man in full armor through heatstroke or dehydration long before he ever saw an enemy. Their training for this theater focused first on survival. They learned to conserve water obsessively, to recognize the signs of heat exhaustion in themselves and their brothers, and to travel during the cooler hours of dawn and dusk whenever possible. The terrain itself presented a tactical nightmare. Shifting sand dunes made for unstable footing for their heavy war horses and could hide ambushes in their leeward sides. The vast, open spaces nullified the element of surprise and made their famous heavy cavalry charges less effective against faster, lighter nomadic horsemen who could easily evade and harass them. In response, the Templars adapted their tactics. They incorporated more mounted archers and crossbowmen into their ranks to engage at a distance. They learned to fight in tighter, more defensive formations, using their discipline to create an unbreakable fortress in the desert, forcing their agile opponents to come to them on terms that favored the Templars' strengths of armored resilience and unwavering cohesion. Conversely, when operating in the dense woodlands and broken terrain of Europe, such as during campaigns in Spain or the Languedoc, a completely different set of rules applied. Here, the forest canopy neutralized the advantages of their towering warhorses and long lances, with low-hanging branches and thick undergrowth breaking up formations and impeding movement. In this claustrophobic environment, the celebrated charge was often impossible. Their training for woodland combat emphasized dismounted fighting. Knights would practice fighting on foot in full armor, using their longswords in tighter, more controlled swings suited to the confined spaces. They drilled in small unit tactics, learning to use the trees for cover, to set ambushes along game trails, and to communicate with hand signals in the muffled silence of the forest. The ability to seamlessly transition from a mounted knight to an armored infantryman was a testament to their versatility. It showed a pragmatic understanding that the environment dictated the form of combat, not tradition or pride. This environmental mastery even extended to the specialized and brutal warfare of coastal raids and naval engagements. While not a navy per se, the Templars maintained a fleet of ships to transport men, supplies, and treasure across the Mediterranean. Knights were trained in the basics of amphibious assaults, practicing how to disembark from landing craft under fire onto a hostile beachhead, a medieval precursor to operations that would become standard centuries later. They learned to fight on the unstable deck of a ship, where balance was everything and a misstep could send a fully armored knight plunging into the sea. This required a different kind of footwork and a preference for shorter, more easily controlled weapons like the axe or mace. Their preparedness for such a wide spectrum of combat environments, from the open sea to the deep forest, from the desert to the castle wall, demonstrates a sophisticated, almost modern, understanding of combined arms and operational flexibility. They were not just knights, they were soldiers of the world, and their training ensured they were never strangers to any battlefield they were called to defend. Yet the Templars' role in a siege was not confined to the thunderous spectacle of artillery or the frantic rush of an assault. Some of their most critical and most dangerous work was conducted in near-total darkness, deep beneath the earth. The art of sapping or mining was a patient and terrifying game of cat and mouse. Teams of Templar sergeants and hired specialists would dig tunnels from their own lines toward the foundation of a key castle wall. This was grueling, claustrophobic labor, performed in stifling heat with the constant, gnawing fear of a tunnel collapse. The objective was to reach the wall's foundation, shore up the tunnel with wooden props, and then fill the chamber with combustible material. Once the fire was set, the burning of the props would cause the tunnel to collapse, bringing a section of the wall above crashing down in a heap of rubble, creating a breach for the assault troops to storm. Of course, the defenders were not idle targets. They employed counterminers who would dig their own tunnels to intercept the Templar sappers. When these opposing tunnels met, a brutal and horrifying close-quarters battle would erupt in the pitch-black, confined space beneath the ground. These subterranean fights were fought with picks, shovels, knives, and clubs, a stark contrast to the open-field cavalry charges the Templars were famous for. Success in mining required not just physical courage but immense psychological fortitude, a willingness to face an unseen enemy in a tomb-like environment where the very earth could give way at any moment. This aspect of their training highlights the incredible versatility demanded of a Templar. One day he was a knight on a charging destrier, the next he could be overseeing the grim, methodical work of undermining a fortress stone by stone. The ultimate test of all this specialized training was the final assault on the breach. Once the walls were sufficiently weakened by artillery or mining, the order to storm would be given. Here, the Templars' ingrained discipline and unit cohesion proved paramount. While other Crusader forces might be tempted by the prospect of plunder to break ranks and charge recklessly into the gap, the Templars were trained to advance in a controlled, methodical manner. Squads of knights and sergeants, often fighting on foot with swords and shields, would form a testudo or tortoise formation, locking their shields overhead and to the front to protect themselves from the arrows, stones, and boiling oil hurled down by the defenders. Their objective was not to be the first inside for personal glory, but to steadily expand the breach, secure a foothold, and allow follow-on forces to pour into the castle or city streets. This disciplined approach to the chaotic, bloody business of storming a breach often made the difference between a costly failure and a hard-won victory, demonstrating that their greatest weapon in siegecraft was the same unwavering discipline that made them masters of the open field. In the deafening chaos of a medieval battlefield where the air was thick with the screams of men, the shrieks of horses, and the cacophonous clash of steel, a shouted order was worse than useless, it was impossible. This was the acoustic reality that made the Templars' mastery of non-verbal communication nothing short of a tactical superpower. Their entire operational doctrine, built on complex maneuvers and unit cohesion, would have collapsed into disarray without a sophisticated, silent language to direct it. They understood that true command and control in the heat of combat had to transcend the limitations of the human voice, relying instead on a system of signals that was both instantly recognizable and brutally simple to execute under extreme duress. This system was built on a triad of tools: flags, horns, and coded messages, each serving a distinct purpose across the varying ranges and urgencies of the battlefield. The banner, or gonfanon, was the most visible and sacred instrument. The Beauseant, the Templars' iconic black and white battle standard, was far more than a symbolic rallying point. It was a central command node. Its position and movement were a continuous stream of information for every knight in the order. Held high and steady, it signaled to hold position and maintain the line. Dipped forward, it was the unambiguous command to advance at a walk. A vigorous waving motion could signal a charge, while a sudden retreat or lateral movement of the banner would instruct the entire formation to wheel or withdraw in good order. Losing the banner was considered a catastrophic disgrace, not just symbolically, but because it would instantly blind and paralyze the entire unit on the field. For auditory signals that could cut through the din and reach knights who might not have a clear line of sight to the banner, horns and trumpets were essential. These were not blown at random, but in specific, pre-arranged sequences, a pattern of short and long blasts that functioned as an auditory code. 2 short blasts might signal archers to prepare to volley, while a long, sustained note could be the call for the entire line to stand ready. The beauty of this system was its range and immediacy. A horn's call could be heard over the crest of a hill or through a cloud of dust, delivering a critical order in a matter of seconds. Every knight and sergeant spent countless hours memorizing these patterns, drilling until their response to each specific sound was a reflexive action, not a conscious thought. This training ensured that a complex tactical shift could be initiated across a wide front almost simultaneously, creating a level of coordination that their opponents would have found bewildering and demoralizing. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of their communication network was their use of coded messages for strategic, longer-range coordination, especially between different commanderies or across the vast expanse of their financial and logistical empire. While the details of their specific ciphers remain a subject of historical debate, it is widely accepted that they employed rudimentary encryption techniques to protect sensitive orders. This could involve simple letter substitution codes or the use of predefined keywords within an otherwise innocuous-looking letter. The security of their communications was vital, not just for military advantage but for the safety of the treasure convoys and supply trains that were the lifeblood of the Crusader states. A captured message that could be easily read by an enemy could lead to an ambush and the loss of vital resources. This early form of operational security demonstrates a remarkably modern understanding of information warfare. The relentless drilling on these signals is what transformed them from mere tools into an extension of the Templars' own will. It wasn't enough to know what the signals meant intellectually. The response had to be ingrained at a muscular level. Training exercises would involve knights practicing complex battlefield maneuvers on the parade ground, responding only to the visual cue of a flag or the auditory command of a horn, all while instructors created distractions and noise to simulate the confusion of real combat. This built a powerful neural pathway between signal and action, ensuring that even in the grip of fear and adrenaline, a knight's body would react as trained. This discipline of communication was the invisible architecture upon which all their famed formations were built, the silent symphony conductor that allowed hundreds of men to move as one, coordinated organism in the midst of what appeared to others to be pure, uncontrollable chaos. This rigid structure began at the very top with the Grand Master, the supreme commander elected for life by a council of high-ranking officials. He was not an absolute monarch, however. His authority was balanced by the chapter general, a gathering of senior officials that could advise him and, in extreme cases, even challenge his decisions. This system, while hierarchical, contained a nascent form of checks and balances, preventing any single individual from leading the order into ruin through poor judgment. Beneath him was the seneschal, a deputy who acted as his second in command and managed the day-to-day administrative burdens, freeing the Grand Master to focus on grand strategy. Then came the marshal, arguably the most critical military role. He was the chief military officer, responsible for all training, equipment, logistics, and tactical planning for the Order's armed forces. This clear division of labor at the highest levels ensured that the immense responsibilities of running an international organization were effectively distributed according to expertise, creating a leadership team rather than relying on a single figurehead. The heart of the Templar fighting force was divided into two main classes, the knights and the sergeants. Knights were always men of noble birth, as their family's wealth was required to furnish the extraordinarily expensive kit of a heavy cavalryman, the warhorse's mail hauberk, sword, and lance. They wore the iconic white mantle as a symbol of their purity and elite status. Sergeants, by contrast, were drawn from the non-noble classes: free men, farmers, and craftsmen. They served as light cavalry, sergeants at arms, and crossbowmen, and they wore a black or brown mantle. While this class distinction was a firm reflection of medieval society, within the order it was tempered by a shared purpose and discipline. A sergeant was expected to obey a knight, but both were first and foremost brothers of the order, bound by the same rule and dedicated to the same mission. This system was brilliantly efficient. It allowed the Templars to tap into a much wider pool of manpower through the sergeants while maintaining an elite core of heavily armored knights, creating a combined arms force within a single, cohesive command structure. This hierarchy was not just a flowchart on parchment. It was a living, breathing system of mentorship that was the engine of the Order's continuity. A young knight, after taking his vows, would be placed under the direct tutelage of a seasoned veteran. This was not a casual arrangement, but a formalized aspect of their training. The experienced knight would teach the novice far more than just swordplay. He would impart the unwritten knowledge of the Order, how to read the flow of a battle, how to maintain equipment in the desert climate, how to manage the stress of a siege, and most importantly, how to embody the Templar values of humility and obedience even in the pride of knighthood. This hands-on, apprentice-style model ensured that tactical wisdom, institutional memory, and core values were passed down directly from one generation to the next, preserving the Order's unique way of war and preventing the dilution of its standards over time. The effectiveness of this chain of command was most severely tested in the chaos of combat, where it proved its worth 1,000 times over. The clear delineation of roles meant that every man knew exactly who to look to for orders, eliminating the confusion and conflicting commands that could cripple a feudal army composed of rival lords. A sergeant crossbowman knew to take aiming instructions from the master of crossbowmen. A knight knew to watch for the signals of the marshal or the banner of the gonfalonier, the standard bearer. This created a seamless flow of information and instruction from the top down, allowing the entire organization to pivot and adapt with a unity that appeared almost telepathic to their enemies. It was this organizational discipline, this ability to act as a single, coordinated entity, that allowed them to execute complex maneuvers like a fighting retreat, one of the most difficult of all military operations without disintegrating into a panicked rout. The lessons embedded in the Templar leadership model resonate powerfully even today, offering timeless insights into organizational excellence. Their structure demonstrates that a clear hierarchy, when based on competence and clear responsibility rather than mere privilege, can be a tool of remarkable efficiency and agility. Their commitment to mentorship underscores that sustainable success depends on consciously cultivating the next generation of leaders, investing time and knowledge to ensure institutional survival. And perhaps most importantly, their fusion of unwavering discipline with a shared, higher purpose shows that the most resilient organizations are those that command not just the hands of their members, but their hearts and minds as well, creating a loyalty and cohesion that can withstand any crisis. Scattered across the map of the medieval world, from the windswept coasts of England to the sun-scorched hills of Palestine, a network of dedicated facilities hummed with constant, purposeful activity. These were the Templar training grounds, the physical heart of their disciplinary machine, where the abstract ideals of the rule were forged into tangible military reality. The Order's leadership understood that true readiness could not be achieved through sporadic practice in borrowed fields. It required specialized, permanent infrastructure designed for one thing only: to simulate the brutal chaos of war in a controlled, repeatable environment. This monumental investment in real estate and resources was a clear declaration that they were not a temporary militia, but a permanent, professional standing army, and their training complexes were the factories that produced their finest weapon, the disciplined knight. The most common and vital of these facilities was the preceptory, a combination of monastic house, administrative center, and military base. Far more than a simple barracks, a major preceptory like the Temple in London or the massive complex at Toma in Portugal was a self-contained world designed to support every aspect of the Templar life. Within its fortified walls, one would find not just dormitories and a chapel, but extensive stables for hundreds of horses, armories stocked with weapons and armor, forges for repairs, and most importantly, vast open grounds dedicated solely to training. These were not empty fields, but carefully curated spaces. A typical preceptory grounds would feature a tiltyard for jousting practice, its length marked for lance drills. It would have clear, flat areas for formation drills and sparring circles worn into the earth from countless hours of foot combat. The very design of these commanderies, with their central courtyards and open spaces, intentionally facilitated the daily rhythm of prayer, training, and labor, making the disciplined life a physical, architectural fact. But the Templars took their preparation a critical step further, moving beyond basic yards to construct SPECIALIZED Chinese letter or mock training environments. Understanding that a soldier trained on a flat, open field would be unprepared for the complexities of a real battlefield, they built elaborate obstacle courses designed to build functional strength and agility under pressure. Knights would practice running up steep earthen ramps in full gear, navigating dummy trenches, and climbing over wooden walls simulating castle battlements. Most ingeniously, they constructed full-scale replicas of siege engines and sections of castle fortifications. These were not mere models, they were sturdy, functional constructs made of wood and earth. Here, teams of brothers could rehearse the intricate and dangerous art of storming a breach, practicing how to ascend scaling ladders under simulated arrow fire, operate a battering ram in unison, or defend a makeshift gatehouse. This allowed them to drill the most high-risk operations over and over again, turning potentially fatal chaos into a choreographed procedure long before they ever faced a real enemy castle. For the pinnacle of mounted combat training, the Templars maintained dedicated lists for jousting and the quintain. The quintain was a particularly clever training device, often a rotating post with a shield on one side and a weighted sack or a piece of wood on the other. A knight would charge it with his lance, aiming for the shield. A successful hit would spin the entire apparatus, and the inattentive rider who failed to duck and ride on quickly would be struck by the swinging counterweight, a humiliating and painful lesson in the importance of strike and return readiness. By training in these purpose-built arenas, knights could hone the precise skills of cavalry combat without the immediate risk of serious injury, building the muscle memory and confidence needed for the real charge. This vast network of facilities also served a crucial logistical purpose, acting as nodal points in the order's incredible supply chain. Preceptories located in the fertile regions of France and England functioned as agricultural hubs, producing surplus food, breeding horses, and manufacturing equipment that could be shipped to the frontline houses in the Holy Land. A young knight might begin his training at a preceptory in Normandy, mastering his basic skills in a relatively safe and resource-rich environment. Once proficient, he could then be transferred to a more austere forward base in Antioch or Jerusalem, where his training would focus on acclimatization and the specific tactical challenges of desert warfare. This system allowed the order to maintain a constant pipeline of well-trained, equipped, and rotated personnel, ensuring that their forces in the Levant were never starved of fresh knights or vital supplies. The humble training ground, therefore, was not an isolated outpost but a vital link in a global military network, demonstrating a sophistication in logistics and long-term planning that was centuries ahead of its time. Yet for all their European discipline and heavy armor, the Templars were not too proud to learn from their adversaries. Their decades of campaigning in the Holy Land forced a stark and pragmatic realization. The warfare of the Levant was a different game entirely, demanding a new set of rules. The traditional Frankish knightly charge, a thunderous, linear hammer blow, was often ineffective against the faster, more fluid tactics of their Muslim foes, who valued speed, deception, and endurance over brute force. This challenging environment became an unexpected classroom, and the Templars proved to be its most astute students. They began a conscious and systematic process of observing, analyzing, and ultimately integrating the most effective Eastern strategies into their own training manuals, creating a revolutionary hybrid form of warfare. One of the most significant adaptations was their adoption of lighter, more practical armor for certain combat scenarios. In the blistering heat of the Near Eastern summer, a knight in a full European mail hauberk was a recipe for heatstroke and exhaustion. The Templars pragmatically shed some of this weight, often opting for shorter mail shirts, lighter helmets, and greater use of padded gambesons. This was not a compromise of their safety, but a recalibration of it. They understood that a knight who could move faster and fight longer with slightly less protection was far more valuable than a fully armored one who collapsed from heat exhaustion after 10 minutes. They also began to incorporate elements of Eastern armor, such as mail and plate combinations that offered better protection against the curved scimitars and armor-piercing arrows they frequently encountered. This shift demonstrated a profound flexibility, a willingness to prioritize practical survival and battlefield effectiveness over rigid adherence to tradition. Perhaps the most tactically significant lesson they learned was the devastating effectiveness of the feigned retreat, a classic Eastern maneuver that turned the Western knight's greatest strength, his aggressive charge, into his most fatal weakness. The Templars watched as Muslim cavalry would engage, then suddenly break and flee in apparent panic, luring overconfident Crusader knights into breaking formation to pursue. This pursuit would inevitably stretch and disorganize the Christian lines, at which point the fleeing horsemen would wheel around, joined by fresh reserves hidden from view, and annihilate the now isolated and exhausted pursuers. Rather than dismiss this as a dishonorable trick, the Templars recognized its brilliant tactical logic. They began to practice and implement controlled retreats of their own, training their units to withdraw in good order as a deliberate tactic to draw an enemy into a vulnerable position, where they could then be counter-attacked by other Templar units held in reserve. This required immense discipline to execute without it turning into a genuine rout, a level of control they drilled relentlessly on their training grounds. Beyond grand tactics, the Templars also adopted the Eastern emphasis on mobile, skirmishing warfare. They greatly increased the number and training of their Turcopol's local light cavalry, often of mixed Christian and Muslim descent, who fought in the Eastern style. These agile horsemen, armed with bows and javelins, became the Templars' eyes and screen. They would harass enemy flanks, disrupt supply lines, conduct ambushes, and perform reconnaissance roles for which the heavily armored knights were entirely unsuited. By embracing this auxiliary force and its methods, the Templars could now operate effectively across the entire spectrum of conflict, from the grand set-piece battle to the endless, grinding war of raid and counter-raid that defined the frontier. This willingness to learn from and even employ those they considered religious enemies speaks volumes about their ultimate pragmatism. For the Templar, victory in defense of the faith was the highest ideal, and if that meant adopting the techniques of the infidel, then so be it. This cross-cultural exchange on the battlefield stands as a powerful reminder that even in an age of deep religious conflict, the relentless demands of war could forge a silent, practical dialogue between opposing worlds, forever changing the art of combat. To the untrained eye, a knight in full plate armor might appear as a slow, clanking automaton, a metal giant constrained by his own shell. But for a Templar, his suit was not a prison. It was a second skin, a masterpiece of protective engineering that he learned to inhabit with a startling degree of grace and power. The reality of moving in a full harness, which could indeed weigh between 50 and 60 pounds, was a world away from its cumbersome reputation. The weight was not a single, crushing burden, but was expertly distributed across the entire body, from the shoulders and chest down to the hips and legs. This design meant a well-fitted suit did not feel like carrying a heavy backpack so much as it felt like becoming a heavier, more powerful version of oneself. The true challenge was not the weight itself, but mastering a completely new way of moving within it, a skill that separated the novice from the master on the battlefield. This mastery began with the most fundamental of tasks, simply putting the armor on. A Templar did not dress himself. It was a cooperative ritual, a precise procedure undertaken with the help of a squire or a brother knight. They trained to accomplish this with an efficient, almost ceremonial speed, knowing that in a sudden alert or the pre-dawn preparation for battle, every moment counted. Each piece had its specific order and lacing point, from the padded arming doublet worn underneath to the final buckling of the gauntlets. This daily practice of donning the armor was the first lesson in its mechanics, teaching the knight the limits of his mobility and the exact placement of every strap and plate. It was a meditative process that transformed the act of dressing into a mental preparation for war, a quiet focusing of intent before the chaos to come. Once encased in steel, the real training commenced. Far from being sluggish, a conditioned knight in armor was capable of remarkable agility. Training drills specifically designed to build this proficiency looked less like traditional weightlifting and more like a bizarre metallic gymnastics session. Knights would practice rolling on the ground and springing back to their feet, a vital skill for anyone unhorsed in the midst of a melee. They would climb short ropes or ladders to build functional strength in their arms and core, and they would even practice vaulting into the saddle without using stirrups to prove they were not dependent on them. Perhaps most surprisingly, they were drilled in performing controlled falls, learning how to tumble and distribute impact to avoid injury. The goal of all these acrobatic drills was to build an intuitive, embodied knowledge of how their mass moved in space, ensuring that in the heat of combat, their bodies would react with confidence rather than panic. The most critical training, however, occurred in the simulated conditions of the sparring ground. Here, knights would engage in full contact sparring with blunted weapons while wearing their full battle harness. This was the only way to truly understand the realities of armored combat. they learned that the greatest enemy was not an opponent's blade, but fatigue and overheating. A knight would quickly discover which movements conserved energy and which wasted it, how to breathe steadily behind his visor, and how to use his armor's deflective surfaces to parry blows rather than relying solely on his shield. The ringing cacophony inside the helmet, the restricted field of vision, the way sweat pooled and steamed, all these sensory challenges had to be overcome until they became mere background noise. This grueling practice built a profound muscle memory, allowing a knight to execute complex blocks, strikes, and footwork without a conscious thought, his body operating the armor as naturally as a sailor operates a ship in a storm. Yet this incredible proficiency would have been meaningless without an equally rigorous discipline of maintenance. A knight's relationship with his armor was one of intimate stewardship. After every training session and every campaign, the meticulous care of his equipment was a non-negotiable duty. In the humid climate of the Mediterranean or the sandy deserts of the Levant, the relentless enemy was rust. Knights would spend hours patiently rubbing down each steel plate with fine sand and oil, scrubbing away the beginnings of corrosion and checking for any loose rivets or stressed metal. Leather straps were inspected for wear and treated with neat's foot oil to keep them supple. This was not a mindless chore, it was a form of active meditation and a continuous lesson in the craftsmanship of his gear. By maintaining it himself, a knight learned every curve, every weak point, and every strength of his own armor. He knew the sound a well-tempered plate made when struck and could detect the faint ping of a crack forming. This intimate knowledge was a matter of life and death, for a malfunctioning buckle or a brittle piece of steel could fail at the critical moment, turning his greatest asset into a death trap. This holistic cycle of training and maintenance, of mastering both the wearing and the caring for their equipment, reveals the Templars' deeply practical and detail-oriented mindset. They understood that true battlefield success was built long before the charge was ever ordered, in the quiet, diligent repetition of preparing both the warrior and his tools for the ultimate test. This relentless focus on endurance was built upon a foundational truth of medieval campaigning. The battle itself was often the shortest, though most intense, part of the ordeal. The real enemy for weeks or even months on end was the campaign itself. The grueling miles of march, the scarcity of clean water, the exposure to blistering sun or chilling rain, and the relentless grind of fatigue that could erode an army's will to fight long before it ever saw the enemy. The Templars, understanding this deeply, engineered their training to be harder than the hardest campaign. They systematically and intentionally sought out discomfort, not as a punishment, but as the essential forge where true mental and physical resilience was tempered. Their philosophy was simple yet profound. By mastering suffering in training, they would never be mastered by it in war. The most elemental of these trials was the forced march. While other military forces might travel light, a Templar knight was expected to move with his full kit. His mail hauberk, his helmet, his weapons, a shield, and his personal provisions, all adding up to a significant burden. Training marches would see them covering vast distances 20, 30, or even more miles in a day over unforgiving terrain. They would practice this not on smooth, manicured paths, but across rocky hillsides, through thick forests, and along sandy riverbanks, simulating the unpredictable landscapes of the Levant. The objective was never speed for speed's sake, but rather sustainable endurance. They learned to find a punishing, ground-eating pace that could be maintained for hours on end, a rhythm that would allow them to arrive at a battlefield not as a breathless, disorganized mob, but as a cohesive, still fresh unit capable of forming up and fighting immediately. This cultivated a legendary strategic mobility, allowing them to reinforce besieged castles or intercept enemy forces with a reliability that often seemed supernatural to their adversaries. Beyond the weight and distance, they trained to confront the very elements themselves. In an age without modern weather gear, exposure was a constant and deadly threat. A sudden downpour could turn a camp into a quagmire and rust equipment overnight. The desert sun could bake a man inside his armor. To inoculate themselves against these hardships, Templars would conduct exercises in the worst conditions available. Training would continue in driving rain, under the scorching midday sun, or in the bitter cold of a European winter. This was not mere toughening, it was acclimatization. By experiencing extreme heat while wearing their gear, they learned to recognize the early signs of heatstroke in themselves and their brothers. They developed techniques for conserving water, for finding shade during brief halts, and for maintaining their equipment even when everything was damp and muddy. This familiarity with discomfort stripped it of its power to shock or paralyze. Where another soldier might be demoralized by a cold, wet night, a Templar simply accepted it as part of the familiar texture of his duty, a minor inconvenience he had overcome 100 times before on the training grounds. Perhaps the most psychologically astute aspect of their endurance training was the controlled induction of sleep deprivation. The rule mandated strict prayer schedules that fractured the night with services like matins, ensuring that a full, uninterrupted night of sleep was a rarity even in peacetime. This was ingeniously designed to simulate the harsh realities of campaign life, where night watches, sudden alerts, and the constant anxiety of a nearby enemy made deep sleep a luxury. By normalizing fatigue, they taught the knight's mind to function with clarity even when his body begged for rest. They drilled battle formations and weapon drills in a state of exhaustion, forging a neural pathway between command and action that could operate on autopilot, bypassing a foggy, sleep-starved consciousness. This ensured that on the eve of a battle, after a tense night of little sleep, a Templar could still execute complex maneuvers with precision, his responses dulled not by fatigue, but sharpened by the relentless repetition of having done it all before while exhausted. This entire system was engineered to create what modern psychology would call a high pain tolerance and a massive resilience reservoir. Every long march completed, every night of fractured sleep endured, every hour trained in extreme weather was a deposit into this reservoir. When faced with the genuine, life-threatening adversities of campaign, a forced march to relieve a besieged castle, a night spent standing to arms in the rain, the bone-deep weariness of a prolonged battle, a Templar could make a withdrawal. He had a deep well of lived experience to draw from, a personal history of having overcome similar challenges and emerged victorious. This eliminated the panic of the unknown. He knew, with a certainty forged in experience, that he could push further, endure longer, and suffer more than his opponent. This unshakable confidence became a self-fulfilling prophecy, allowing them to outmarch, outlast, and out-endure their enemies, turning the grueling marathon of medieval warfare into their greatest strategic advantage. Their resilience was their secret weapon, a quiet, inner fortitude built not by chance, but by a calculated and brutal curriculum of controlled hardship. This direct link between their exhaustive preparation and their triumphs on the field is nowhere more vividly illustrated than at the Battle of Montezad in 1177. Here, a vastly outnumbered force of some 500 Templar knights, alongside a few thousand additional Crusader troops, found themselves facing the army of the formidable Muslim commander Saladin, which numbered well over 20,000. The Crusaders were exhausted, sick with fever, and caught by surprise. To any ordinary military unit, the situation would have been hopeless, a prelude to a massacre or a desperate rout. But for the Templars, their years of drilling under fatigue and stress kicked in. They did not see an insurmountable obstacle. They saw a set of conditions their training had prepared them for. King Baldwin IV, the Leper King, gave the order to attack, and the Templars launched a disciplined, focused charge directly into the heart of Saladin's larger force. This was not a wild, frenzied rush, but a controlled hammer blow executed with the precision they had practiced 1,000 times on their training fields. The impact was devastating, shattering Saladin's center and sending his army into a panicked retreat. The victory was so complete that Saladin himself only narrowly escaped capture, and his forces were pursued with a relentless efficiency that only a highly disciplined army could maintain. Montezad was not won by luck or divine intervention alone. It was won because the Templar training regimen had forged a unit that could operate at peak effectiveness even when outnumbered, exhausted, and surprised. 15 years later, at the Battle of Assof in 1191, we see another masterclass in applied discipline, this time during one of the most perilous operations in warfare, a fighting retreat. King Richard the Lionheart's Crusader army was marching down the coast of Palestine, harassed incessantly by Saladin's skirmishers. The goal was to reach the strategic port of Assof without allowing the Muslim army to break the Crusader column apart. The Templars, serving as the rearguard, bore the brunt of this constant pressure. For hours, they endured a hailstorm of arrows and feigned charges, all while maintaining a slow, orderly march. Their training in unit cohesion and communication was the only thing preventing the column from disintegrating. The sergeants and knights held their formation, using their crossbows to keep the enemy at bay and their shields to protect each other, all while responding to the banner and trumpet signals that kept them in lockstep with the rest of the army. The real test came when the pressure became unbearable, and a portion of the Hospitaller Knights broke ranks to charge without orders. The line began to falter, threatening a catastrophic collapse. But the Templars, drilled endlessly in such contingencies, largely held firm. Their discipline provided the stable anchor that allowed King Richard to seize the moment and turn a potential disaster into a coordinated countercharge that ultimately routed Saladin's forces. The victory at Assof was a direct product of that Templar discipline, the ability to remain calm under extreme pressure, to trust in the chain of command and their signals, and to maintain formation when less trained units around them were breaking. What set the Templars apart in these and countless other engagements was not just their courage, which many knights possessed, but their profound and unshakable composure. In the screaming chaos of a medieval melee, where the din of clashing metal and dying men could overwhelm the senses, a Templar knight possessed a psychological anchor. His mind, conditioned by years of spiritual practice and mental conditioning, did not succumb to the blind panic or bloodlust that could cause a soldier to break formation and jeopardize everyone around him. He could process the flow of the battle around him, listen for the sound of a horn over the noise, and spot the subtle dip of a banner that signaled a change in tactic. This heightened state of awareness, this ability to think and act deliberately amidst the storm, was a force multiplier that no amount of individual bravery could match. It allowed them to execute complex maneuvers that required split-second timing and absolute trust, like the wheel of a cavalry formation or the closing of a gap in the infantry line. Their opponents often fought as collections of skilled individuals. The Templars fought as a single, intelligent organism. This consistent battlefield success, built on the bedrock of their training, created a fearsome reputation that became a weapon in itself. The sight of the stark black and white Beauseant banner advancing steadily across the field, the silent, determined line of white-mantled knights lowering their lances in perfect unison, had a devastating psychological impact. Enemy armies knew the stories of Montezad and Assof. They knew that this was a force that would not break, would not rout, and would not stop. Often, the mere commitment of the Templar reserve was enough to decide a battle, as opposing commanders would see their movement and begin to withdraw, unwilling to test their mettle against the Order's legendary resolve. This psychological advantage, earned through decades of demonstrated excellence, meant the Templars could win engagements before a single blow was even landed, simply through the intimidating power of their professional reputation. Their discipline had built a myth, and that myth became an integral part of their arsenal, proving that on the medieval battlefield, the most powerful weapon was often not the sharpest sword, but the most prepared and disciplined mind. While the Knights Templar stand as the most iconic of the medieval military orders, they were far from alone in their mission. To truly appreciate their unique focus, we must place them alongside their two great rivals and contemporaries, the Knights Hospitaller and the Teutonic Knights. These three orders shared the same fundamental structure of warrior monks, answering to the Pope and taking vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Yet their core missions diverged dramatically, and this divergence sculpted their identities, their daily lives, and ultimately their military methods. The Hospitallers, as their name implies, began with a primary mandate of care and healing, running a massive hospital in Jerusalem for pilgrims. The Teutonic Knights, founded later, were initially established to provide medical care to German Crusaders, but their mission radically evolved into one of territorial conquest and colonization in the Baltic region. The Templars, however, from their very inception, were conceived as a pure military guard detail. This singular purpose, to be the standing army of the Holy Land, became the lens through which every aspect of their existence was filtered, setting them apart as the most specialized and focused fighting force of the three. This fundamental difference in purpose created a tangible contrast in their daily operations and culture. A Templar preceptory would have echoed with the sounds of constant weapons drills and the thunder of cavalry charges. Their resources were funneled overwhelmingly into acquiring the best war horses, the finest steel, and maintaining a state of perpetual combat readiness. A Hospitaller commandery, while still a formidable military base, would have also housed extensive infirmaries, apothecaries, and a constant flow of patients and medical staff. Their knights, though equally skilled in arms, were also expected to participate in the Order's healing mission, creating a more blended culture of the martial and the merciful. The Teutonic Knights, operating on the cold frontiers of Prussia and Livonia, were engaged in a perpetual state of frontier warfare and settlement. Their castles were not just military garrisons but administrative centers for governing conquered territories, converting local populations, and managing the influx of German colonists. Their warfare was as much about building and holding land as it was about pure combat. This divergence is starkly evident in their tactical preferences and military evolution. The Templars, dedicated to the defense of fixed routes and sites in the Holy Land, perfected the set-piece battle and the disciplined charge. Their entire system was built around high-intensity, decisive engagements against the main armies of their Muslim foes. The Hospitallers, with their deeper roots in the region and broader humanitarian mission, became masters of a more resilient and enduring form of warfare. They excelled at garrison defense, protracted sieges, and combined operations, leveraging their extensive network of hospitals and strongholds to sustain long campaigns. The Teutonic Knights, fighting against pagan Baltic tribes in dense forests and across frozen lakes, became experts in a brutal form of seasonal warfare. Their campaigns were characterized by winter raids, the construction of fortified lines to secure conquered territory, and the use of heavily armored knights to crush lightly armed opponents. They were conquerors and governors first, a reality that shaped their military into a powerful, but more generalized territorial force. Perhaps the most telling comparison lies in their ultimate fates and legacies. The Templars, with their narrow, hyper-specialized focus on banking and warfare, made powerful enemies in Europe who saw their immense wealth and independence as a threat. When the Crusader states fell, their primary reason for existence vanished in the eyes of their critics, leading to their dramatic dissolution. The Hospitallers, however, successfully adapted. After the loss of the Holy Land, they retreated to Rhodes and later Malta, transforming into a naval power that continued their war against Islamic forces at sea, all while maintaining their hospitalizing mission. The Teutonic Knights carved out their own sovereign state in Prussia, which lasted for centuries, evolving into a feudal German principality. The Templar identity was so laser-focused on a single time and place that it could not survive its passing. The broader, more adaptable missions of the Hospitallers and Teutonics allowed them to evolve and endure. This contrast powerfully illustrates a timeless strategic lesson. Extreme specialization creates peak effectiveness in a specific context, but it can also create profound vulnerability when that context suddenly changes. The Templars became the ultimate weapon for the Crusades, but when the Crusades ended, the world had no other use for a weapon of such specific and terrifying design. Though the last Templar Grand Master was burned at the stake in 1314, the embers of their disciplinary philosophy refused to be extinguished, smoldering for centuries before igniting within the armies of a New World power. The Spanish tercios of the 16th and 17th centuries, often hailed as the first modern infantry in Europe, became the most direct and profound inheritors of the Templar legacy. These formidable formations of pikemen and arquebusiers did not merely fight with new technology, they fought with a new spirit, a spirit of unwavering cohesion, deep professionalism, and a collective identity that transcended the individual soldier. Just as the Templars were bound by a sacred vow to their order, the soldiers of the tercios were bound by an unbreakable loyalty to their coronel and their standard, considering their unit their true home and their comrades their true family. This was not a feudal levy but a standing, professional army, and its organizational soul bore the unmistakable imprint of the warrior monks who had perfected the model centuries earlier. The parallels are striking and deeply structural. The Templars' fusion of the spiritual and the martial found a secular echo in the tercios' legendary esprit de corps. Where the Templars had their rule and their prayers, the tercios had their fierce pride and their complex honor codes. This cultivated a similar psychological resilience, an inner fortitude that allowed them to stand firm in the face of horrific casualties, just as the Templars had held the line at Assof. The tercios' famed tactical flexibility, their ability to seamlessly integrate different weapons systems into a devastating whole, mirrored the Templars' own combined arms approach of heavy cavalry supported by sergeants and crossbowmen. Both forces understood that victory was not the product of heroic individuals, but of a single, disciplined organism acting with a unified will. The tercio was, in essence, a democratized version of the Templar ideal. Its strength came not from noble birth, but from drilled skill and unwavering unit loyalty, proving that the principles of monastic military discipline could be successfully secularized and scaled into a national army. This thread of influence stretches even further, weaving its way into the very fabric of modern special operations forces. The rigorous selection processes of units like the Navy SEAL or the British SAS are not merely tests of physical strength. They are brutal gauntlets designed to weed out those who lack the specific mental and psychological makeup required for the mission. This is the direct descendant of the Templars' holistic conditioning, the infamous Hell Week, where candidates are pushed beyond all conceivable limits of sleep, warmth, and comfort, is a modern, calculated incarnation of the Templars' endurance training, designed to build the same profound resilience reservoir. It teaches the same lesson, that the mind breaks long before the body, and that true strength lies in mastering the former. Furthermore, the sacred concept of the team, the unwavering devotion to the man next to you that defines Special Forces culture, is a secular echo of the Templar Brotherhood. Their motto, "The only easy day was yesterday," reflects the same embrace of perpetual hardship and readiness that defined the Templars' daily existence. Modern operators, like the knights of old, are expected to be masters of multiple disciplines, from direct action to medical training to communication, echoing the Templars' versatility as both knight and financier, warrior and logistician. The focus on operating in small, tightly knit teams behind enemy lines, relying on flawless communication and absolute trust, mirrors the Templars' effectiveness in small detachments across the hostile landscape of the Holy Land. The technology has changed beyond recognition, but the essential human ingredient forged through extreme discipline, shared suffering, and a higher purpose remains strikingly familiar. The true legacy of the Templars, therefore, is not found in any specific tactic or piece of equipment, but in a revolutionary philosophy of what makes an effective warrior. They pioneered the idea that peak military performance is a three-legged stool supported by physical readiness, mental fortitude, and spiritual or ethical purpose. Remove any one leg, and the entire structure collapses. This holistic approach has become the bedrock of elite military training worldwide. Their emphasis on unit cohesion over individual glory dismantled the archaic notion of the hero knight and replaced it with the infinitely more powerful concept of the team. They demonstrated that discipline is not about punishment, but about freedom, the freedom to act decisively and effectively in the most chaotic and terrifying environments imaginable. In a world that often remembers them for their mysterious end or their rumored treasures, their greatest secret was never hidden at all. It was written in the daily rhythm of their prayers, the relentless repetition of their drills, and the unbreakable bonds between brothers. It was a simple, timeless truth that unwavering dedication is the ultimate weapon, and that true strength is always an inside job. Perhaps the most persistent and alluring myth is the idea of the Templars as guardians of a fabulous lost treasure, a notion popularized by everything from Grail legends to modern adventure films. The historical reality, however, is far more interesting and reveals their true genius. The Order did possess immense wealth, but it was not stored in a shadowy vault of gold and jewels. It was a dynamic, operational capital. Their revolutionary banking system, allowing pilgrims to deposit funds in Europe and withdraw them in the Holy Land, required vast liquid assets to function. This treasure was constantly in motion, funding salaries, purchasing supplies, maintaining their fleet, and financing the construction of a network of castles. Their financial acumen was not mystical. It was a brutally practical form of power, a logistical mastery that made them the backbone of the Crusader economy and a source of envy and suspicion for kings who struggled to manage their own finances. Their real treasure was not a hidden chest but a sophisticated economic engine that sustained their military operations for nearly 2 centuries. Another widespread misconception paints the Templars as esoteric mystics, initiates into a hidden stream of ancient knowledge discovered beneath the Temple Mount. This romantic idea suggests their battlefield success was derived from secret wisdom or even magical artifacts. The truth, uncovered in their own rule and the records of their contemporaries, is almost the exact opposite. Their power came from radical transparency and uniformity, not secrecy. Every Templar, from a recruit in Paris to a veteran in Jerusalem, lived by the same detailed rule. They practiced the same drills, prayed the same prayers, and answered to the same chain of command. This created a predictable, reliable system where every knight knew his role and every commander knew the capabilities of his men. There was no need for hidden secrets when their overwhelming strength was the product of a perfectly standardized and openly practiced discipline. The real magic was in their mundane, grinding consistency. The fantasy of the Templar as a lone, brooding hero also crumbles under historical scrutiny. Popular fiction often depicts them as questing knights errant, answering to no one but their own conscience. In reality, the Order systematically stamped out any notion of individual glory. Their rule explicitly forbade knights from breaking formation to pursue personal glory or richer opponents for ransom. A Templar who acted alone was punished, not celebrated. Their legendary charge was a thing of terrifying collective beauty, not a series of individual duels. Their identity was subsumed into the unit. They drew strength from their brothers, fought for their brothers, and found honor in upholding the collective will of the Order. This rejection of the individual hero archetype was their greatest strength, creating a military machine where the whole was infinitely greater than the sum of its parts. Even their famous end contributes to the mythos, with whispers that their sudden dissolution was punishment for uncovering a dangerous truth or abandoning their faith. The historical record points to a much more terrestrial yet equally dramatic tragedy of power politics. By the early 14th century, the Crusader states had fallen, and the Templars' immense wealth and power, once vital to Christendom's defense, now made them a target for a cash-strapped King Philip IV of France. Their international network, which answered only to the Pope, was seen as a state within a state, an affront to the rising power of secular monarchs. Their downfall was not due to heresy uncovered, but to accusations fabricated to justify seizing their assets and eliminating a rival power structure. The tragedy of the Templars is not a mystical mystery but a stark lesson in the dangers of becoming too powerful, too independent, and too closely associated with a cause that has lost its relevance in the eyes of the world. Dispelling these myths does not diminish the Templars. It elevates them from the realm of fantasy into the even more impressive arena of human achievement. Understanding that their prowess was born from repetitive drills, not magic spells, makes their story more accessible and infinitely more inspiring. It means their greatness was not a fluke of history or a gift from the gods, but the product of a system that any of us can study and learn from. It was a greatness built on the sweat of the training ground, the quiet focus of the chapel, and the unwavering trust between brothers. By letting go of the fictional treasure hunters and secret mystics, we can finally appreciate the real marvel, a group of men who, through sheer discipline and organization, became one of the most effective and formidable institutions the world has ever seen. The echoes of Templar discipline are not confined to the dusty pages of history. They resonate with a startling clarity in the most demanding environments of the modern world. Consider the transformative crucible of military basic training. A new recruit is stripped of their civilian identity, their hair shorn, issued uniform clothing, and subjected to a relentless, highly structured daily schedule. This is not arbitrary harshness. It is the deliberate dismantling of the individual ego to rebuild a cohesive unit, mirroring the Templars' suppression of personal glory for the good of the Brotherhood. The intense physical conditioning, the weapons drills repeated until they become instinct, the emphasis on meticulous equipment maintenance, these are all direct, modern parallels to the Templar Regimen. The goal is identical: to forge an individual's mind and body into a resilient, reliable instrument capable of performing under extreme duress, where hesitation can mean catastrophe and unwavering trust in your team is the only thing that guarantees survival. The psychological armor built through this process is the same spiritual fortitude the Templars cultivated, just in a secularized form, where the higher purpose is the mission and the safety of the squad instead of divine will. This philosophy of holistic development has also been eagerly adopted by the corporate world, though often in a more sanitized package. The rise of corporate retreats featuring team-building exercises, whether navigating rope courses, solving complex puzzles under time constraints, or participating in simulated challenges, all seek to replicate the unit cohesion the Templars mastered. These activities are designed to break down departmental silos, build trust between colleagues, and teach a group to communicate and act as a single entity to achieve a common goal. The modern business lexicon is filled with Templar-esque ideals: resilience in the face of market pressures, the discipline of daily routines and key performance indicators, and the ethical framework of a strong company culture that guides decision-making. A successful organization, much like the Order, understands that a team united by a shared purpose and mutual trust will outperform a collection of brilliant but self-interested individuals every time. The lessons are clear: invest in the whole person, foster unwavering loyalty to the team's mission, and victory becomes not just possible but probable. On a deeply personal level, the Templar blueprint offers a powerful antidote to the distractions and fragmentation of contemporary life. The growing popularity of practices like deliberate habit formation, digital minimalism, and strict morning routines all speak to a yearning for the kind of structure that defined a Templar's day. Their fusion of the physical, mental, and ethical is echoed in the modern wellness trifecta of physical exercise, mindfulness meditation, and continuous learning. By dedicating time each day to conditioning the body, focusing the mind, and reinforcing personal values, an individual builds their own inner resilience reservoir. This self-discipline is the civilian's armor against the constant siege of stress, information overload, and procrastination. It's about creating a personal rule, a code to live by that provides stability and purpose. Just as a Templar's training allowed him to remain calm in the chaos of battle, this modern self-mastery allows us to navigate the complexities of daily life with greater focus, determination, and peace. The timeless value of their approach lies in its recognition of a fundamental human truth: peak performance in any field is never the product of a single skill. It is always the intersection of prepared physicality, unshakable mentality, and guided morality. The Templars didn't just create soldiers, they built a system for human excellence. Their legacy is a reminder that whether you are a soldier, a CEO, an artist, or a student, true mastery is not found in a shortcut or a secret. It is forged in the unwavering commitment to daily practice, in the strength found in trusted camaraderie, and in the power of a purpose that is greater than oneself. Their principles, tested in the fires of medieval warfare, provide a surprisingly relevant roadmap for anyone seeking to conquer their own modern-day battles and build a life of disciplined accomplishment. The story of the Templar training regimen is far more than a tale of medieval military might. It is a profound exploration of human potential and the architecture of discipline itself. Their system reveals a timeless truth, one that resonates just as powerfully today as it did 8 centuries ago: that true, enduring strength is never the product of a single attribute. It is not born from brute force alone, nor from mere intellect, nor from blind faith. Instead, it emerges from the seamless fusion of all three, a holistic trinity of physical readiness, mental fortitude, and spiritual or ethical purpose. The Templars did not just train the body to wield a sword, they conditioned the mind to remain calm amidst chaos and fortified the spirit with a cause greater than any single life. This integration is their most powerful legacy, a blueprint for excellence that transcends the battlefield and speaks directly to the challenges of our own lives. Their approach teaches us that the foundation of any great endeavor is unwavering consistency. The Templar Knight's life was a symphony of repetition, from the pre-dawn prayers to the endless weapon drills. This was not mindless monotony. It was the deliberate practice that engraves skill into muscle memory and values into character. In our world of instant gratification and endless distraction, their example is a powerful reminder that mastery in any field, be it art, science, business, or personal growth, is a marathon, not a sprint. It is built in the quiet, uncelebrated hours of daily effort, in the commitment to showing up and doing the work even when motivation wanes. The Templars understood that discipline is the bridge between goals and accomplishment, and that bridge is built one consistent, deliberate brick at a time. Perhaps their most surprising lesson is the necessity of adaptability. Despite their iconic image, they were not rigid traditionalists clinging to outdated methods. They were keen observers and pragmatic innovators, willing to learn from their enemies, shed ineffective tactics, and incorporate new ideas. They lightened their armor for desert warfare, adopted Eastern strategies like the feigned retreat, and mastered both cavalry charges and siege engineering. This intellectual flexibility ensured their relevance across diverse terrains and against evolving threats. In our rapidly changing world, this adaptability is more crucial than ever. It reminds us that true strength is not stubbornness, but the wisdom to pivot when circumstances change, to continuously learn, and to evolve without losing sight of our core principles. Ultimately, the Templars' power was rooted in an unwavering commitment to a purpose that extended far beyond themselves. They fought not for land or personal glory, but for the protection of the vulnerable and the defense of a sacred ideal. This higher purpose was the glue that held their discipline together, the North Star that guided them through unimaginable hardship. It transformed their rigorous training from a burden into a privilege, and their individual sacrifices into acts of collective devotion. This is perhaps the most applicable takeaway for us today. Whether you are leading a team, building a business, or simply striving to be a better person, connecting your daily efforts to a deeper why, a purpose that serves something larger than yourself, provides the resilience to persevere through setbacks and the inspiration to achieve extraordinary things. As we close this chapter on the Knights Templar, their story invites us to look inward. Their secrets are not locked away in lost treasure vaults or encrypted manuscripts. They are written in the universal language of discipline, dedication, and purpose. Consider how you might apply their ancient principles to your own modern battles. How can you build a more consistent routine to achieve your goals? Where can you embrace adaptability to navigate new challenges? And most importantly, what higher purpose fuels your journey and gives meaning to your efforts? We would love to hear your reflections in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history's most formidable warriors, please subscribe and hit the notification bell for more journeys into the fascinating chapters of our past. Thank you for watching.